Welcome to this series of videos on accessibility requirements for public procurement of ICT products and services in Europe, the EN 301-549 standard. This is the fourth video. It's sponsored by Microsoft and produced by Funka. My name is Susanna Loren. I'm an accessibility expert with a long experience in standardization. In this video, we are going to have a closer look at what might be the most important chapter of the EN 301-549, Chapter 4. This chapter covers functional performance statements. To help you understand the relationship between the functional performance statements in Chapter 4 and the technical requirements of Chapter 5 to 13, we will also look at Annex B. You might ask yourself, what does functional performance statements mean? In the context of EN 301-549, it means what functionality is required to cater for different user needs. The essence of this standard is to explain how to enable users to locate, identify, and operate functions in the ICT, no matter of their abilities. So this chapter is a really good place to start. There are only two subsections in this chapter. The first subsection is how to meet the functional performance statements. The second one describes the different abilities of users and why you need to consider these when procuring or designing ICT products and services. Then we are going to talk about how you can use Annex B to understand the relationship between the technical requirements and the user needs. Meeting functional performance statements. Section 4.1 explains how the subsection 4.2 is meant to be used. The ICT functions must be possible to find, use, and understand, regardless of the user's abilities. It is also important to note that impairments can be permanent, but also temporary or situational. Users with multiple impairments might need specific combinations of accessibility solutions. This means you have to consider all needs described in 4.2, as well as a combination of them. To meet the user needs of 4.2, the ICT must meet the applicable requirements in Chapter 5 to 13. The relationship between the technical requirements and the user needs is set out in Annex B. 4.2 Functional Performance Statements. Subsection 4.2 describes user needs for full functionality and documentation of the product or service, with or without the use of assistive technologies. Let's go through all parts of 4.2. Some users are blind. Therefore, the ICT must be possible to operate without vision. Audio and tactile interfaces can be helpful. Some users can see, but have limited vision. Therefore, the ICT must provide possibilities for users to use the vision they have. The possibility to magnify the interface, and for the individual to set contrasts and brightness, are examples on how to cater for some low vision users. But audio can also be of help for low vision users. Some users are colorblind. Therefore, the interface of the ICT must be possible to use without being able to differentiate between colors. If the colors have a functional meaning in the interface, like for example a choice between yes and no, it must also be possible to understand that meaning through other methods, like for example text or shape. There are users that cannot hear. Therefore, the ICT must be possible to use without hearing. Visual and tactile interfaces can help deaf users. Other users can hear but have hearing impairments. So the ICT must provide possibilities for the users to use the hearing abilities they have. To ensure clear audio without background noise and the possibility to control the volume will help some users with limited hearing abilities. Visual and tactile interfaces can also be helpful. There are users that cannot speak. Therefore, the ICT must be possible to operate without using the voice. The use of keyboard or other kinds of physical input devices help users that cannot speak. Some users have motor impairments that affect their abilities to make gestures or use strength. Therefore, the ICT must be possible to use without using both hands at the same time or twisting something. single-handed operation, stepwise operation, and speech can be ways of catering for this user group. Users in a wheelchair or short persons might have a limited reach. So ICT must be within reach of all users, both when it comes to height and depth. Leaving room for knees and toes of wheelchair users, and placing important objects at a reasonable distance from where users stand or sit, are examples on how to meet these needs. There are users who are sensible to flashes. The ICT must be possible to use without being exposed to flashes. Clear information or warnings before flashes, a limited area exposed to flashlight, and minimizing the number of flashes per second can help in meeting these needs. Some users have cognitive impairments, language difficulties, or learning disabilities. The ICT must provide features that make it possible to use for users that cannot read or understand complex interfaces. Making the ICT intuitive and easy to use is helpful for this group. A logical structure and order is important, as well as the possibility for the user to adjust timing of operations. Help and support are also key to meeting the needs of this user group. Some accessibility features, like audio or enlargement, can be problematic from a privacy point of view. The ICT must make it possible for the user to maintain privacy when using it. To enable the user to connect personal headsets, to not provide spoken versions of passwords, or to let the user have the control of legal, financial, and personal data can be helpful. Annex B. Relationships between requirements and functional performance statements. Annex B contains a table mapping technical requirements with functional performance statements. The table also covers the success criteria of Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. This table is important to make assessments of what impact accessibility problems have for end users. To read the table, you need to understand some abbreviations. First, there are abbreviations of the user needs of Chapter 4. So WV means without vision, for example. Which user group does each requirement affect? P stands for primary relationship. This means that the requirement supports the functional performance statement of this particular user group. S means secondary relationship. This requirement provides partial support for the functional performance statement, because some users in this group may use the feature in specific situations. Now, let's see how this works. The technical requirements are listed in a vertical row and the functional performance statements horizontally. If we look at requirement 5.1.3.11, which has to do with volume when listening is provided via a private headset, the table can be read like this. The requirement for private listening volume has a P for primary support in the column WV, which stands for without vision. This means that this requirement supports the functional statement for users that cannot see. Or, in plain language, if the ICT provides the possibility for the user to control the volume when listening via a private headset, this will meet one of the needs for blind users. The table can also be read the other way around. One way to support the needs of blind users is to provide private listening volume. Since blind users cannot see the screen, they need other means to use the interface. This can be provided via audio. If we go to the next column, LV stands for limited vision. Here the support is marked with an S for secondary, showing that the requirement provides partial support for this particular functional performance statement. This means that some low vision users may use the feature in specific situations. Private listening volume does not support the functional statements or user needs for users who are colorblind or deaf. But for users who have limited hearing capabilities, the speaker volume can be important, if the user can and chooses to use a private headset. Again, this is marked with an S, because the requirement partially meets the user needs of this group. Not all users with limited hearing will use a headset, but if they do, the volume is important. Therefore, this is secondary. For users that cannot speak, who have limited strength or reach, or are sensitive to flashes. Private listening volume can of course be nice to have, but it is not primary if you look at the specific accessibility needs of these groups. This is why they are not marked in this table. For some users with cognitive disabilities, using audio will be helpful, and in that case, controlling the volume is important. But not all users in this group will be helped by listening. That is why the technical requirement is marked as secondary to this functional statement. If we compare requirement 5.1.3.11 for private listening volume with 5.1.3.12 that has to do with speaker volume, we can see that the same groups of users are affected by both, but only the private listening volume supports the functional statement for privacy. This is because a speaker cannot be considered private, no matter how much the user can control the volume. On the other hand, private listening volume can provide some support for privacy when users choose that function. Here is an example to see how the functional performance statements and the technical requirements work together. The train operator is about to procure new ticket machines. They use EN 301-549 to ensure that the solution they get is as accessible as possible. They get tenders from 2 different suppliers, but unfortunately none of them meet all the requirements. Solution A is a machine on a stand that does not have any knee or toe clearance under the controls and display of the machine. That means it is not possible to get close to the machine for a wheelchair user. This fails to meet requirements 8.3.2.4, 8.3.2.5, and 8.3.2.6. Solution B is a machine that does not offer any speech output, making it impossible to use for many users with visual impairment. This fails to meet requirement 5.1.3.1. To understand the impact of those failed requirements, look at table B2. Here you can see what groups are affected by the different requirements. 5.1.3.1 has a primary impact on one group, blind users, and a secondary impact on 2 other groups, users with low vision and users with cognitive impairments. We can also see that requirements 8.3.2.4, 8.3.2.5, and 8.3.2.6 all are connected to the same user group, users with limited reach. So here only one group is affected. And here comes the interesting thing. On paper, 1 failed requirement is better than 3 failed requirements, right? But since requirement 5.1.3.1 affects 3 user groups, and all 3 requirements, 8.3.2.4, 5, and 6, affect only 1, you could argue that the impact of 1 single requirement might be bigger than the impact of the other 3 requirements together. It is of course very problematic to compare user groups to each other, and that is not what we are trying to achieve. But if you have a better understanding of the impact different requirements have to whom, you will be able to make a more initiated decision. Another thing you have to consider is if one solution risks totally blocking usage for some user groups, or is it just making it harder to use? If it is impossible to get close enough to the ticket machine with a wheelchair, for example, this can exclude wheelchair users from buying tickets. This means you need to look at the details in the offer to make sure the solution does not exclude users. Yet another perspective to include is what alternatives there are. Is it, for example, possible to buy a ticket with a mobile phone, or is there a ticket office? You can also discuss with the supplier. If they cannot meet the requirements right now, they might be able to improve the product to the next version. Or it might be possible to modify the existing version in some way. These kind of requirements are certainly not the only considerations you have to make when procuring or designing an ICT solution. But the tables here are an important tool for you, so feel free to use it. Remember, the fact that users have different needs and abilities is the reason for this standard. Even if there are no requirements in this chapter, it is the most important one. If you do not understand why the requirements are there, you will probably not understand how to fulfill them. If you would like to know more, please have a look at the rest of the videos in our series. There is one video for each chapter in the standard, Thanks for watching.